Hey everyone, welcome back to CLIU's differentiation series that our professional learning team is launching throughout the whole month of January. My name is Kelly Tremba, and I'm thrilled to be back to share yet another short learning session with you all. Today I'll be sharing some engaging and differentiated learning strategies that support critical thinking. Teachers of all grade levels are welcome. As the experts of your particular grade level, I invite you to think about what these strategies would look like in your own learning space. This slide deck is available to you on the YouTube page, so all of the examples and links to resources that I reference are available for you to use as you wish in your own classroom. I always start any session with a community building activity that allows me to connect with my participants. So I'm going to start by modeling what I would do here if we were live and not recording. So while you're settling in, I'd like you to think of a time when you were really physically or intellectually challenged. Do you have a picture on your phone perhaps? Maybe you were running a marathon. Or maybe you were really struggling through a art history class that you were taking. I'd like you to share in the chat or share your video or unmute in order to share. This gives us an opportunity to via Zoom or Google Meet, or even if we're not meeting face-to-face in that way and we're doing it on a Google Doc or Google Slides, this will give me an opportunity as an instructor to get to know my participants. So I'd encourage you to do something similar when you're working with students. Since the goal for today is to share some instructional strategies that will help you to differentiate within your classroom and push each and every ability level and learning style toward critical thinking. I just wanted to start by recalling the depth of knowledge steps. So of course, this is very similar to the way that we typically will set students up for learning. A lot of times we start with a recall and reproduction, and sometimes that's where it ends. But we want to make sure that we're continuing to push students towards the second step of comparing and basic reasoning, the actual application of the skills and the concepts, then pushing them to the next level, level 3, where they're doing some strategic thinking, they're planning, they're putting forth some complex reasoning, and then again, pushing them yet even further to step 4, where we're extending their thinking. We're pushing them to synthesize that information and interpret in order to perhaps solve a problem. What this looks like in a wheel fashion on the depth of knowledge wheel, as many of you might be more familiar with seeing, we want to push our kids to the level 3 and the level 4, the strategic thinking and the extended thinking. So when we're using words like design, connect, critique, analyze, revise, develop, construct, compare, investigate, we're really pushing students beyond the recall and the just real simple compare and contrast and identifying cause and effect and predicting. We really want to push our students to get to the point where they are critically thinking, because that is truly where the learning is occurring. So the real question is, how can we support our students in order to do these acquire this level of thinking? I just want to inspire you first before sharing some examples of instructional strategies by sharing a few quotes about critical thinking. Too often, we give children answers to remember rather than problems to solve. And I'm sure as teachers, we can all agree that sometimes it's the easier route to give them answers to remember than actually give them problems to solve. Another one, the man who can make hard things easy is the educator. So when we're proposing problems to solve, we really want to be able to support them so that they have access to the knowledge that they're going to need in order to solve those problems. And another one, think for yourselves and let others enjoy the privilege to do so. So we want to push students to think for themselves, not to think in the way that we push them to do so. With that in mind, I just want to, again, just to build a little bit of background here, I want to take a look at these summary statements about learning by Ron Brandt. So what do we know about learning? We know people learn what is personally meaningful to them. We know people learn when they accept challenging but achievable goals. We know learning is developmental. We know that all individuals learn differently. We know that people construct new knowledge by building on their current knowledge. We know that much learning occurs through social interaction. We know people need feedback in order to learn. We know that successful learning involves the use of strategies, which of course themselves are learned. Everyone has their own learning styles and preferences. We also know that a positive emotional climate will strengthen learning, and learning is influenced by the total environment. So when we look at this list, I want to challenge you to think about which of these have to do with critical thinking. Of course, environment is going to invite students to think more freely and take risks. But when I look at numbers 1 through 5, they're really encouraging students to think more critically. And it's also encouraging us as educators to provide the opportunities, the scaffolds, and the environment that are going to support critical thinking. So at this point, we're going to explore some instructional strategies that I have tried myself, that I have used myself, and that I just truly believe are going to push our students toward critical thinking. So a really easy strategy to use is to just project an image. Of course, it has to be an image that is going to encourage some thought, encourage students to really analyze and dig into. So if I just shared an image like this that you see on the screen, and I asked my students to just write something, if I prefer that they do some processing and write it down, or say something. And I know that is very broad, and it's not giving them much direction. But when we encourage our students just to say something or just write something, they're identifying their own observations. They're coming up with their own questions. And then, of course, we would want them to share. Kids answer so many questions that they do not even ask. I'm going to give you a moment to read that again to yourself. So when we go back to those statements about learning, kids learn what is meaningful for them. If they're composing the questions and the observations based on the image that I just shared with you, they're invested in the learning. I'm going to move on to another example. This is an example that I love to use with students. It's sharing a video, but sharing no sound. So you're actually using a silent video to activate thinking. I'm not going to share with you this whole video, but I will share with you a little bit of it because I want to be able to emulate what I would ask students to do. So I'm going to press play in just a moment. And while you're watching, I would just like you to think about some of the observations or questions that you might have while you're watching. And that's what I want us to encourage our students to do. So we see on the screen, it introduces a word, symbiosis. It might be familiar to some students, might not. But we also got the context clue or the hint about living things. As students are watching this video, they might start to see a pattern. They might start to see some similarities, some differences. But certainly, They are making these observations on their own. They're getting little hints here and there throughout the video. When you offer the opportunity for students to just watch a video and you play it silently, it's a more active participation opportunity. When we play a video, all too often students sit back and just are passive, and they're taking in what is being given to them. But when we play it silently, they really have to try to figure out what is going on and the information that is being shared. So it's a great opportunity for students to construct their own learning, but it's also a great opportunity to encourage them to do some real thinking. Probably as they're watching this, they're making some connections, they're synthesizing, they're analyzing, all level 4 tasks. So I just shared with you an image and I shared with you a video. So 2 visual opportunities. I'm going to now share with you a text example. Okay, so this excerpt here comes from Ralph Waldo Emerson and an essay called Self-Reliance. So on the left-hand side, you can see that I have 3 full paragraphs. It is a multi-paragraph essay, several pages in a literature anthology. But I just pulled the 3 paragraphs out of the side. So many times we require our students to read the entire text of any piece of language that we might have in our anthologies, whether it be a social studies book or a science book, and of course, a literature anthology. When so many times students don't have to dig into the entire text, they can dig into a chunk of the text, or in a science book, a graph or an infographic that would essentially help them to really dig into the information. So it would be exhausting for me as an English teacher to push my students to really do a close read of all 3 of those paragraphs on the left or the entire essay as a whole. However, if I pull out an excerpt like I have that's big in the middle of the screen, trust thyself, every heart vibrates to that iron string, etc. If I have my students really digging into, let's say, the word perception, which is highlighted in yellow, or the phrase vibrates to that iron string, which is highlighted in pink, or the sentence, accept the place that divine providence has found for you, the society of your contemporaries, the connection of events. When you have your students really digging into a word, a phrase, a sentence, a paragraph within a longer text, what you're really doing is you are encouraging them and pushing them towards thinking more critically, towards digging in more deeply. And that is going to encourage them to understand the text more comprehensively and be able to talk about it. So this is an example of a complex text that is based on meaning and language. Here I share with you another example of a complex text. The reason that this text would be considered complex is because of the meaning and the background knowledge demands that it is requiring. So the way I might scaffold and encourage my students to think more critically about this particular poem is I would chunk it. I would chunk it by stanza, dig into each stanza, and then have my students draw an inference after each stanza. Of course, after each inference and reading each stanza, I would then have them take a look at all the inferences that they have created and draw a conclusion about the central message of this particular poem. Another example Digging into, again, complex text. This is actually song lyrics by Pink Floyd, and it's reflecting the historical time when the Berlin Wall was taken down. Again, this would be considered a complex text based on its meaning and background knowledge demands. So here we have verse 1, the chorus, and verse 2. What I would encourage my students to do is dive deeply into these lyrics. And then I would pair the lyrics here, I would pair critical thinking question stems with the lyrics. And I'm going to share those critical thinking stems on the next screen. I'd encourage you to create a wall or a bulletin board or something where these questions and questions like these can be shared on a regular basis as a reminder for you and an encouragement for you to continue to ask higher level thinking questions. So for example, a few of the questions that I've shared, and this particular link, this slide is linked to a website and a resource that offers many, many more questions, but I've just chosen a few to highlight. Question 1, what evidence can you present for or against? So again, if we take it back to the lyrics in the song that I just shared with you, it might ask for and against tearing down the Berlin Wall. How does tearing down the Berlin Wall contrast with, let's say, the building of the Great Wall of China? Another question, how could you outline or concept map and the events that led up to the tearing down of the Berlin Wall? Why is this significant? Why is this time in history significant? Explain your reasoning. So notice where it's not asking, where was the Berlin Wall? On what day was it torn down? Why was it erected in the first place? It is really pushing students to think more critically about the significance of the Berlin Wall's existence and then its deconstruction. Again, hanging sentence strips like this somewhere in your classroom as a reminder is a great way to encourage you to continue asking questions that are going to push your students. At this time, I'm just going to give you 1 minute to just pause and process. I just shared with you a whole bunch of examples, and I want to give you a moment to be able to just pause and write down some of the examples so that you can turn around and try these in your classroom. The questions that I just shared with you, they are all questions that you can also differentiate. You could give certain students certain questions. So I'm going to just share with you, once again, a few more examples of ways to differentiate with students and push them towards critical thinking. One thing that teachers don't demonstrate often are think alouds. So when students are not pushed to critically think, they often don't understand what it looks like. So many students think that teachers just rise and out of the floor in the morning and they're just bestowed with this vast intellectual knowledge. However, We all know that is not true. We all know all of the work that goes into creating any lesson, let alone really difficult lessons. So I would encourage you, whenever it's possible, to model critical thinking with your students. And that could be done, using infographics like you see on the screen. Um, inf- uh, Infographics that are representing perhaps the water cycle. That's a very complex and confusing image with all the arrows going in different directions. And quite certainly, a lot of those words are going to be new for your students. So, looking at that and making some observations out loud, I see these arrows. I think the arrow going up from the water shows that it is going up into the sky. And again, just really thinking aloud um, with your observations. If you look at the two apples to the right, one is genetically modified apple and the other one is organic. Certainly, there are quite a few differences that you can point out. And when you are doing a think aloud, I see this, I'm wondering why. Again, can do something very similar with the pyramid shaped structure in the bottom left-hand corner. And I have on there a baseball player because I know oftentimes our gym teachers always feel left out. And I wanted to make sure that I shared an example that would be relevant for our physical education teachers as well. Just even doing an analysis of a batter's stance when he is hitting a ball. So again, we can just push our students in to do critical thinking. And of course, we can differentiate that by the complexity of the images that we're sharing. So this is a great example of scaffolded tasks, and I'm actually going to go live to site for this one. For those of you who are signed on as math teachers or teach math, this is a great resource for you. There's a website, actually it's not a website, it's a Google sheet that a gentleman named Dan Meyer has created, and he has come up with this idea of these 3-act math tasks. And I'm going to just click on this to share one with you. And this is what it looks like. And of course, you can see the standard that it's identifying. You can see how many acts there are. You can see the suggested question that is being encouraged within this particular math act. You can see over here the task title. I'm going to click on the one that's called dueling discounts. You can see here that there's a prologue. This is I'm going to show you a short little video that introduces the students to this particular task and activates learning. You see here, Act 1, which coupon should I use? So in this situation, of course, the students are going to do a mathematical computation that is going to lead them to the answer, which of those 2 coupons is the best to use. Then they apply that. For example, make an argument about which coupon is better deal than the other. Tell us under which circumstances it's better. Use the examples below to illustrate your case. So here we have one item, but there are also other items underneath. Again, this is scaffolded, and this is tiered in terms of pushing our students towards critical thinking. So after you have identified which students will do what, which acts, you can decide who is going to take on the prequel or the sequel. I'm sorry. What if you were holding 2 coupons, one that said X off and the other said X percentage off? Which do you use and under what conditions? So again, there are, these questions progress in level of difficulty and level of depth of knowledge. So this is a great example for math teachers, and I would encourage all teachers to visit this site just to see in what way the questions are being presented. Again, on this slide, this particular math resource is linked. So when you do access this slide, you can click on either the dueling discounts. This is actually going to that specific example. This one up here, Dan Meyer's 3-act math tasks, goes to the Google Sheet that I shared. And this here is going to give you a little background information in how to teach these particular tasks. I'm going to share yet another example with you, and this one has to do with the Bill of Rights. So we know, we have this very valued document in our American history called the Bill of Rights. So this is an example of pairing critical thinking with learning style, because of course the focus of this month and this session is differentiation. I did share this example in the small groups, but I thought it was worth sharing again in this particular session, because it does demonstrate how we can push students to critical thinking via learning style. So if we broke our students up into an analytic group, a practical group, a creative group, and this actually, I'm sorry, I should say creative group as well. And we had our students summarizing each amendment using one-syllable words. This is our analytical group. They are being encouraged here to read, to process, to reword, and to, really think about and synthesize what each bill is saying and saying it in a more simplified fashion. The practical group here, they have to apply what does this look like in real life and really reflect and analyze real life and what each looks like in real life. The creative groups here, they too are having to process and synthesize and analyze what these Bill of Rights look like in terms of images or and sharing in a creative way, whether it be a song, a rap, a play. But we're pushing them to think, but again, we're appealing to their learning style. When we are doing this, once again, we're, look at here at the level 3 and the level 4 learning verbs, I'm going to call them. We're pushing our students to create. We're pushing them to analyze, to really apply concepts and synthesize and make some connections. And in the process, they've formulated, they've drawn some conclusions, they compared, they constructed. So doing a task like the one I just shared is really pushing them to do some critical thinking. This particular website that I'd like to share, this is, I found this treasure. It's 28 critical thinking question stems for any content area. So I shared a few with you earlier in the slide deck. This is linked to a resource that has the exact title that's on the screen, 28 critical thinking questions. Taken a little bit long to load, so I'm gonna let you explore that on your own. But I would encourage you to ask these questions and keep them handy so that we are reminded to ask those questions often. Because when we think about the learning pyramid and when students are most involved in learning, when they're most actively learning, they're participating and when they're actively learning and participating, they're remembering 70% of what they are participating in, discussing, giving a talk, doing dramatic presentations. So we want to continue to push our students to really talk about and have discussions about what it is that we're trying to encourage them to learn in the classroom. I'd really like to encourage you in the spirit of talk time and in the spirit of the 70% of what they remember is done during talk time. I would really encourage you to use, discussions in your classroom. If you're online, creating dialogue on discussion boards. I just have two little comments circled here. One way to push students to think critically is for the instructor to elaborate on the discussion question in light of his or her experience and knowledge. This helps students to see how the topic relates to the world outside. So you really sharing what this looks like in the real world and making it relatable. And then encouraging you to, consider this statement down here. In doing so, you can ask various types of questions to get students to address problematic argumentation, elaborate on incomplete ideas, or think through implications of their assertions. So again, pushing them to think. I have on this slide some discussion tools to fuel students in discussion in the classroom. I have 2 resources here that I'd like to share with you. This one here at the bottom is a tool called Parlay that will facilitate the discussion online, and there is a tutorial available on this page as well. So if that is something that you are unable to do in your learning management system, a discussion board, be sure to check out these 2 resources. So that's it for today. I just want to encourage you to continue to join us for the rest of January. We have student connections and ways to differentiate and student connections coming on the 26th, and then a comprehensive session on maximizing differentiation strategies on the 28th. In February, we have a theme of literacy coming your way. So we'll be sharing some sessions on vocabulary, building background, scaffolding, reading strategies, analysis, and supporting struggling readers, all as they relate to literacy. Thank you for attending this session on differentiated instructional strategies that support critical thinking. Feel free to email me, reach out anytime, and I will be certain to help you. Act 48 credit is available once you complete the exit ticket that is posted on our CLIU Ready PD page. Have a great day.